We're going to proceed, with this weather and government shuts down around here, because I don't know, though I'm not from northern Illinois, I am from southern Illinois, and apparently we don't have a lot of trouble with a little bit of snow, but about here they do. So, any rate, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's hearing on the state of American steel industry. As you know, Mr. Crawford and I serve as co-chairs of the Caucus. He was kind enough to let me kick things off this year, and he'll be taking, for next year, he'll be the chairman in the seat for next year. I've really enjoyed with Rick and Vice Chairman Pete Valesky. This is a role that all of us are very proud to serve in, and we work hard to try to make sure that our steel industry grows and grows strong and tries to come back to the best that we can possibly have it. We have a large panel of witnesses and members who would like to ask them questions, so I'll ask to keep opening remarks very brief if we could. Steel is critical industry in the American economy and national security, but it is an industry in crisis, there's no doubt. Foreign competitors have distorted the market by flooding it with unfairly traded steel imports. Many of these products are sold at or below fair market value. The President's decision to invoke 232 will help our steel production battle against these illegal foreign trade practices. Look no further than my own district, where U.S. Steel fired up a furnace that will bring 500 jobs back to Granite City Works. We are starting to see real results for real people. Many of today's witnesses have decades of experience in the industry that both produce and consume steel. I look forward to hearing from each of you. I now yield to Co-Chairman Crawford for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Bost. I appreciate working with my co-chair, Mr. Bost, and our other co-chair, Pete Visklosky. I appreciate him and his depth of knowledge on this industry. He's been involved in this for a long time, and appreciate y'all for being here this morning in spite of the weather. Thank you for your dedication to be here. It's important that we hear from you, and it gives us a better insight into how we can serve the steel industry and the people who comprise the steel industry. We know that AISI have been on Section 232 most of the last couple of years, and I, for one, am pleased with the President's action. I think he did it exactly the right way. I think he's left the door open for countries to make the case for why they should be exempted, but we can't continue to ignore the problems that exist on the global market with regard to steel and the actions of nations like China and some of their trading partners. And so I think it's important that we support the President's action on this. I think it was timely. I think it was the right course, and those nations that would like to make their case are being given the opportunity to make their case, and I support that. Again, we want to hear more about what's affecting you today. As Mike alluded to, we know that the industry has been in crisis, and we see daylight. I hope you feel the same way, and I hope that we're able to take your comments and hopefully weave some policy that supports the industry and makes it better for not just for your industry, but for everybody in the supply chain and for national security purposes and things of that nature. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning, and I will yield back.
Thank you, Rick. And now Chairman Valesky. And Pete has been around, as Rick said, Pete has been around this for a long time, and we yield to him to.
Thank you very much. I think that's a reference to my age, but I appreciate it, and I want to thank the chair especially for supplying coffee this morning for the hearing. Being from Gary, Indiana, that's one of the basic food groups. I usually don't have an opening remark, but given the situation we find ourselves in, I would make a few brief comments. So first of all, I would want to thank both of my vice chairs. I certainly want to also thank my colleague, Mr. Doyle from Pennsylvania, our colleague to be, Mr. Lamb, for being here to continue to learn about issues, for all of the members of the caucus. For what they have done over the years, and particularly this last year, because it's not a coincidence that there was a 232 investigation. So I do want to thank my chairs, all of the members of the caucus for their initiative. I want to thank the Steelworkers all of the employees of the industry as well as the executives who are involved for their tireless work to bring us to the point that we are. I would simply say going forward and look forward to your testimony is I believe our responsibility is to keep an eye on people. There were representations made at the beginning of this century that VRAs were going to be in place for a certain period of time. They were not. There is apparently, from my understanding, no time frame for the current situation. So that's one of the concerns I would want to monitor. Secondly, I do understand that for countries and exemptions, there's a process. It's described to me as being very nebulous, so I think it is worth keeping an eye on. The exemption process for products is more defined, but again, as we proceed, I'm going to be very curious as to what is left of the tariffs that were suggested were going to be imposed at the outset. Finally, as I said a couple of weeks ago at a reception, there is more to this than simply the issue of tariffs and trade. It is also making sure that those who enforce our trade laws are adequately funded. And will continue to complain that I'm disappointed that the current administration asked for a reduction in funding at the International Trade Commission for fiscal year 18. I would hope by the end of this week we will correct that error. I am also disappointed that for fiscal year 19, the current administration asked to cut funding for the ITC. I'm very disappointed that the current administration asked to cut funding for the International Trade Administration for fiscal year 18. I would hope by the end of the week that we have taken corrective action. Again, for all of the talk, I am disappointed that the current administration asked to cut funding for the International Trade Administration for fiscal year 19. We need people to enforce our laws. And finally, I am a proponent of Buy America provisions. And I'm disappointed that on the Appropriations Committee, we had to work diligently this entire year to reinstate the 5 Buy America provisions, particularly for the defense appropriation bill, that were stripped by the current administration. For fiscal year 19, those 5 Buy America provisions were taken out again by the current administration. You certainly have our pledge that we will continue to work to put those back in. So do think that the issues before the United States Congress here are more broad-ranging. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. Okay, we will now hear from today's panelists and witnesses. I'd like to remind everyone to begin your delivery of your testimony after you're introduced. I want to yield to Co-Chairman Crawford to introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ferriola is Chairman and President and CEO of Nucor Corporation. He's also the Chairman of American Iron and Steel Institute. He began with Nucor in 1991, became CEO and President in January of 2013. When I was first elected, Nucor was one of the largest companies in my district, and since then they've continued to grow by being one of the most innovative steel makers in the country, not only in processing and manufacturing, but also in workforce development, strategic thinking, and that positions them as one of the top steel producing companies in the nation. And with that, Mr. Ferriola, you are recognized.
Thank you, Congressman. Chairman Crawford and Boston, Vice Chairman Velaskowski, on behalf of our 25,000 teammates, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. I am John Ferriola, Chairman, CEO, and President of Nucor Corporation. Nucor is the largest steel producer in the United States and North America's largest recycler. I'll get straight to the point. The President got it right. By imposing tariffs on imported steel, President Trump is sending a strong message that dumping steel into our market will no longer be tolerated. As you are well aware, global production overcapacity has caused a surge of unfairly traded steel imports into our market. The President recognized the devastating impact of these imports and took bold action to initiate the 232 investigation. The Commerce Department rightfully concluded that imports threatened the ability of the domestic steel industry to supply our national defense and our critical infrastructure needs. We urge you to be vigilant against efforts to undermine the President's action. These tariffs will help level the playing field and will lead to increased capacity utilization for domestic steelmakers. What does this mean for Nucor? Well, it means that for our teammates, more production, and that means heftier paychecks because of our performance-based compensation system. For our company, tariffs will further enable us to keep doing what we have been doing for decades, investing in our teammates, our facilities, and new technologies. Over the last 9 years, we have invested a total of $8 billion in acquisitions and capital investments to grow our company and broaden our product offering. For example, we recently announced that we will build 2 rebar micro mills, one in Florida and one in Missouri. Together, these projects represent an investment of $500 million and will create more than 500 jobs. In Chairman Crawford's district, we are getting ready to open our new specialty cold mill facility. This $230 million investment will expand our capability to produce lighter gauge, higher strength sheet steels that automakers use and need to meet higher fuel requirement coming in the near future. The President's action will allow us to realize a return on our investments, which will help get our industry back on a sustainable path for the long term. While the industry did experience improved financial results in 2017, after-tax profits still lag far behind most other manufacturing sectors. The financial results we received last year will only be sustainable by aggressively addressing unfairly traded imports, as the President is doing. In conclusion, stronger trade enforcement coupled with tax reform are creating an attractive investment environment for steel. And we could see an even more dramatic boost if we could work together to pass an infrastructure plan, and one that contains a strong Buy American provision. We appreciate your leadership and the support that the members of this caucus have given to our industry for so many years. Our teammates and their families thank you all. The President's decisive and meaningful trade action and congressional leadership in enacting tax reform will ensure that the best days of the American steel industry are still to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our next witness is Mr. Roger Newport, Chief Executive Officer of AK Steel, which is based in Westchester, Ohio. AK Steel is the last domestic manufacturer of electric-grade steel used in power grid transformers. I know the fact weighed heavily on the President's decision with 232, specifically for that particular item. Mr. Newport began his career at AK Steel in 1985 and rose to his current position in 2016. Mr. Newport, you may now deliver your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Vost and Crawford and Vice Chair Voskowski and other members of the Congressional Steel Caucus. As mentioned, Roger Newport, the CEO of AK Steel, and I want to thank you for inviting me to testify on behalf of our 9,200 employees that I'm representing here today. I'd also like to express my appreciation for your leadership in the caucus, which has been really instrumental in bringing the industry's challenges to the forefront. To address those challenges, President Trump took the bold and historic step of imposing a 25% tariff on steel imports to defend America's steel industry and its workers from imports that threaten our national security. We support these actions and encourage the caucus to embrace them as well. But there's been an unintended loophole in these actions that has national security and job implications that is the focus of my testimony today. AK Steel has a proud heritage that spans more than 119 years. We make carbon, stainless, electrical steels. However, we are the last producer of grain-oriented electrical steels in the United States. While the 232 decision is important to all of our products and markets, the loophole I'm referring to impacts electrical steel, specifically its use in the transformer industry and its downstream supply chain. Grain-oriented electrical steel, also known as GOES, is a product that is critical to transmission and distribution transformers for all types of energy across our country. While the United States was once home to multiple manufacturers of GOES, the GOES market has been decimated by unfairly traded imports over the past decade, leaving us as the only domestic producer in the United States. Unfortunately, the avalanche of unfairly traded imports continued last year, with GOES imports nearly doubling in 2017 from 2016. While we appreciate that the Department of Commerce's Section 232 report makes several mentions of electrical steel and its importance to our country's national security, as well as it acknowledges that we're the sole domestic producer, the report and subsequent presidential action contain an unintended loophole that will allow foreign producers to circumvent the 232 remedy to the detriment of our national and economic security. The loophole lies in the fact that the 232 does not cover the key internal components of electric transformers, the steel laminations, the cores, and the core assemblies, which are basically just stacked, slit, or wound electrical steel inside the transformer. Inclusion of these products is necessary to prevent circumvention of the 232 tariff on electrical steel through these downstream components. Without that, producers can simply just evade the tariff by targeting a different part of the transformer supply chain, which entails moving the minimal value-added process of making laminations, cores, and core assemblies outside the United States and just importing them in. In fact, the transforming core manufacturing business in the United States is suffering. Imports of cores and core assemblies in 2017 increased anywhere from 212% to 670% in 2017 compared to 16. These show that under the threat of 232 remedies, producers can and did easily move up the supply chain and began importing these products, these cores and core assemblies. In 2017, imports of core and core assemblies were up 273% from Canada and 436% from Mexico compared to 2016 import levels. Yet there is no GOES production in either of these countries. We believe this should concern the Steel Caucus and all of your congressional colleagues because of the national security and economic implications it raises to our country. In the case of a natural disaster or a cyber or physical attack on our country's electrical grid system, the United States national security cannot be put in jeopardy as a result of the absence of a domestic supply chain supporting key components of the electrical grid. Increasing our country's dependence on foreign suppliers would create a severe risk of catastrophic failure of the electrical grid and disruption of the nation's businesses and citizens' way of life. A stable domestic manufacturing base for core and transformers built from domestically produced electrical steel is vital to our national security interest of the United States. But that capability is also at risk as there are only a few remaining U.S. manufacturers of these important electrical infrastructure products. We believe this illustrates why it's imperative that the administration take additional action on the electrical steel infrastructure supply chain and apply a remedy to electrical steel laminations, transformer cores, core assemblies, and transformers. It is also why the administration must cap these imports at a maximum of 100% of their 2017 volumes, no higher, to any country it may determine should be exempt from the Section 232 remedy. This includes Canada and Mexico, as we have already lost significant downstream businesses, as I mentioned, to those countries. So we encourage the Steel Caucus to urge the administration to quickly take this additional action in order to ensure that the President's Section 232 tariff is effective, and that the U.S. maintains production capacity to produce all the products throughout the electrical infrastructure supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to yield to Vice Chairman Velkowski. I keep trying to do the name thing. I really do, Pete.
Okay.
And
Worse,
I'm
Mr.
just,
Chairman, don't worry
this old
about
German
it.
kid. Yeah. Anyway, he can
It's
introduce the next.
It's my pleasure to introduce Leo Gerard. Mr. Gerard is International President of the United Steelworkers, and I would simply say that I appreciate the fact that he has dedicated his entire life to making sure that the dignity of work for every human being in North America, as well as around the globe, has been recognized. Leo, you can proceed.
Thank you very much. I won't mess up your name. I'll just call you Pete.
That's good. That's wise.
I'm, as Vice Chair Visklowski said, I'm the International President of the Steelworkers Union. We're the primary union involved in the production of both steel and aluminum, but we're also a predominant union in all forms of manufacturing with 850,000 active and retired members in the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean. Give you an idea of our reach. I want to say that during the short period of time since the President announced the 232, we've seen an increase in jobs and commitments of already almost 3,000 new jobs, some in aluminum, some in steel. But we also know from discussions with some of our major employers that as things move along and we actually see these things kick in, there's going to be major investments in modernizing some of their facilities. We're going to look at hopefully being able to aggressively re-enter the oil country tubular mills because of the onslaught of South Korean oil country tubular materials when they don't drill 1 inch in their own country. So that we're anxious to get on with it. And I want to just say that although I'm just regurgitating some numbers, these aren't just numbers. These are in fact real people. These are people whose lives are being improved. They're having an ability to go back to work and think about putting money away for their kids' college and doing the kind of stuff that would keep their family healthy and strong. I want to make a point that really has to be addressed not just by the 232, but by the Steel Caucus overall. We have a huge global oversupply in steel. And it's not just China. And in fact, as I see it, most developing countries want to have a steel industry, and they want to have a steel industry that is over capacity so they can dump into other markets. And I think it's important in that regard that the Steel Caucus and the administration look at the application of the 232 and not allow unwarranted exclusions by certain countries. Our union supports an exclusion for Canada because of the integration of our economy in both steel and our manufacturing sector, but we're not in favor of exclusions for countries like Russia, the Ukraine, South Korea, Brazil, to name a whole bunch. And it's important that that standard be kept up. I can say that we're going to be measuring every success every day. Is production increasing? Are jobs returning? Is our ability to enhance our national security through increased capabilities to provide steel and aluminum supplies when they're needed? For too long, this country has let our defense industrial base suffer at the altar of some nebulous term called free trade that really does not exist. All trade is managed, it's just on whose behalf is it being managed for. And I can say that in the industrial sector, in the steel sector, the aluminum sector, the tire and rubber sector, the paper sector, all the sectors we represent, it's not being managed on our behalf. It's being managed on behalf of a number of countries that deliberately cheat and don't play by the rules. And I can say to you, and as I've said to the President and to Wilbur Ross, mind blank there, Wilbur Ross, that our union is not looking for special treatment. What we're looking for is a level playing field. In any country or any industry that wants to oppose getting a level playing field is announcing that they intend to cheat. Period. And if they intend to cheat, why should we let them in our market? So as you make your comments through the administration on the 232 in its application, I would want you to keep those two things in mind. That we represent workers who not only make the steel, they mine the ore, they mine the coal, they make the material, they ship it, and they ship it to some of our plants where our members work making a product. And our approach is very simple. If you need to cheat to be in business, you shouldn't be in business. And we're not afraid to take that on. Right now we're going to have to deal with one of our local unions whose employer wants to import Russian slabs. Well, you can get slabs in America. We'll get Granite City and full blast and you can get slabs there. So as we work through that process, we'd want you to keep in mind that these are real human beings that are going to get their jobs back, be able to raise their kids, be able to put something away maybe for a vacation, and all we want is a level playing field. So thank you very much. Look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you. I now Co-Chairman Crawford to introduce our next guest.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Mark Millett is the president, CEO, and co-founder of Steel Dynamics Incorporated. He's also the vice chairman of the Steel Manufacturers Association. He's a recipient of the 2014 Association for Iron and Steel Technology Steelmaker of the Year Award. Prior to the formation of Steel Dynamics, Mark worked for Nucor Corporation for 12 years and earned his bachelor's degree in metallurgy from the University of Surrey in England. And with that, Mr. Millett, you are recognized.
There you go. I don't know why they put two in front of me, but
But I thank you for the opportunity to speak before you and for your support of the American steel industry and the industrial manufacturing base. I am President and CEO of Steel Dynamics, the fourth largest domestic steel producer in the United States, having an annual capacity of around 11 million tons. We operate state-of-the-art facilities in 9 states. We're the youngest of the largest steel producers. Along with 2 other entrepreneurs, founded Steel Dynamics in 1993, and we're now entering our 25th year. In that time, we have grown from a single steel mill in Butler, Indiana, with 275 employees, to 6 steel mills, 7 steel fabrication plants, and numerous other manufacturing facilities. We now employ over 7,700 employees. And I would like to address the 232. The SMA and SDI strongly support President Trump's action, which addresses the surge of steel imports that undermines the viability and the vitality of American steel producers, thereby threatening our national security. We're optimistic that the 232 remedy will provide a level playing field for U.S. producers by reducing imports to allow steel utilization rates to approach 85%, a level at which much of the industry should be able to earn its cost of capital and be healthy. We look forward to the measures going into effect for a period of sufficient duration for companies to reinvest in our domestic steel industry. As a whole, the U.S. steel industry continues to find ways to cut costs while being innovative, continuing to hire, train, and develop employees, and by delivering incredible value to the U.S. consumer. But our industry cannot succeed in the face of an ongoing onslaught of government-subsidized and dumped steel from foreign countries. The key problem is that China's state-sponsored growth in the steel sector has been unprecedented and detrimental not only to the U.S. steel industry, but to the global steel industry as a whole. In the early 2000s, China's steel capacity grew quickly to satisfy internal demand, but in 2006, China became a net exporter, continuing to grow capacity even as their steel demand peaked. They continued this negligent growth through the financial crisis aftermath, when most of the world's steel industry suffered severe production cuts due to the collapse in global steel demand. Between 2009 and 2015, China's capacity to make steel expanded a further 350 million tons. For perspective, that is the equivalent of 3.5 times current U.S. production capacity. While China remained the world's largest steel consumer, their production vastly outstripped domestic demand, and a flood of exports, as we all know, has saturated the global markets since 2014. U.S. steel producers responded with a series of successful anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases against steel imports from China and other countries, most recently in 2015 and 2016. But unfortunately, these cases resulted in only temporary relief. Imports of steel in 2017 increased 15% over 2016 levels, due largely to country and product shifting. Chinese government support for its industry led to a reckless expansion when Chinese and global demand simply did not warrant the investment. These policies are not market-driven practices that have led to a normal expansion of production to meet consumption. They are unfair practices that include distortive support state-owned enterprises. Such practices include artificially low-cost financing, equity infusions into poorly performing companies from state-owned banks, and preferential provision of raw materials. We're also concerned that other countries, including but not limited to South Korea, Vietnam, import vast quantities of dumped and subsidized steel from China to make further processed steel products that are then shipped to the United States. South Korea is now the top export destination of Chinese steel, has in turn become the largest exporter of steel pipe and tube to the United States. As I've noted, we have successfully brought AD and countervailing duty cases against unfair, injurious imports. However, these efforts have not stemmed the tide of relentless steel imports. That is why we support President Trump's 232 National Security Program on steel imports, and will work with him and his administration to make the program a success. I appreciate your attention. Thank you for your bipartisan leadership of the Steel Caucus in working with us to make this vital program successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Pete, if you would recognize.
My pleasure to introduce the next panelist, John Burritt. John serves as CEO of ArcelorMittal USA, and also as an accounting major myself, happy to point out he's an incredibly bright individual. He not only received an MBA in accounting at the University of Chicago, but to my knowledge, he is also the only panelist here who lives in the 1st Congressional District of Indiana. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the nice introduction. Good morning, members of the caucus. This hearing is most timely as the nation debates President Trump's recent action to fight steel imports that pose a national security risk to our country. In that debate, I repeatedly hear two arguments put forth. First, that China is not a problem for the U.S. steel industry, since it accounts for only a small portion of total steel imports into the United States. And second, that job losses in the steel industry are just the result of productivity gains and that steel imports don't have much of an impact on the industry's employment. To those arguments, we on the front lines of the international steel trade war respectfully say, no way. Here's the reality. China is by far the world's largest steel exporter. Fueled by government subsidies, its steel exports increased dramatically in the last decade, growing from less than 25 million metric tons in 2009 to 112 million metric tons in 2015. While this number has declined recently, China still exports more steel than the next 3 exporting countries, Japan, South Korea, and Russia combined. ArcelorMittal is the most global steel company in the world, as well as one of the largest in the U.S., and we see the threat of Chinese steel everywhere we operate, in the Americas, in Europe, and elsewhere. As China dumps its steel in other markets, those producers suffer and look for alternatives, often in the United States. China's largest export market is South Korea. One of South Korea's largest export markets is the United States. That's the way the steel flows. The steelworker who has been laid off doesn't much care if the steel coming in is stamped made in China or made in Korea. The industry has aggressively used the trade remedy tools that Congress has provided, but they aren't fully doing the job. With our country-by-country remedies, we are playing whack-a-mole with global imports, and the mole is winning. Members of the caucus, I've spent the past 30 years in the American steel industry, and yes, thanks to incredible technological advances and the extraordinary hard work of the men and women of this industry, we do produce far more steel per worker than ever before. But I can tell you that the industry has been hammered year after year, and there's a finite limit to our ability to compete against unfair, subsidized steel with more technology and productivity. We cannot invent our way out of this challenge forever. I also know that demand creates jobs. Yet, despite the U.S. recovery from the Great Recession, steel employment hasn't recovered along the same trajectory because imports have captured more of that demand growth than U.S. steel producers. We greatly appreciate President Trump's decision to use his authority to adjust imports to make sure that the United States has a steel industry that can meet the national security needs of this country. As the largest producer of steel plate for armored vehicles and Navy vessels, we are proud of the contributions we make to the national defense. As a result of the Section 232 action, ArcelorMittal USA will be looking for opportunities to maximize our steel production and potentially undertake new investments to meet the needs of our customers. Our customers need our support and your support because these measures won't work if foreign steel just gets imported in a different form. But with time, these measures should encourage U.S. investment, strengthen employment opportunities, and improve the sustainability of the U.S. industry. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. And Rick, if you could introduce the next guest.
Sure. Tony Frabotta is a native of the Chicago area and has been in the steel industry for most of his career. He received his bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Illinois Chicago. Must be something about the University of Illinois Chicago. He currently is the Vice President of Finance for Zekelman and has served in various roles during his 27-year tenure with the company, including finance, operations, M&A, and government relations. I'm proud to have Zekelman in my district, which makes structural tubing used in construction and infrastructure markets. And with that, Mr. Frabotta, you are recognized.
Thank you. Good morning, Co-Chairman Bost, Co-Chairman Crawford, and Vice Chairman Visklosky, and the distinguished members of the Congressional Steel Caucus. I'm Tony Frabotta, as stated. I'm the Vice President of Zekelman Industries.
Can you, Mr. Frabotta, if you would turn your mic on? Is it on?
It's on.
Okay.
I'll get it closer. Zekelman Industries is the largest producer of steel pipe and tube products in North America. We have 2,000 employees at facilities located in Alabama, Arkansas, California, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. I would also like to add that one of our facilities is located, as Chairman Crawford said, in Blytheville, Arkansas. In addition, we have a significant number of employees in Vice Chairman Visklosky's district who work at our Chicago facilities. I appear before the caucus to speak as the Vice Chairman of the Committee on Pipe and Tube Imports, an industry trade association comprised of the nation's leading producers and an array of carbon and stainless pipe, tube, fittings, and fittings products. CPTI member companies are located throughout the country in 32 states and 95 congressional districts, and today have over 37,000 employees nationwide that are engaged in the production of steel pipe and tube products, which are used in the agricultural, automotive, construction, defense, energy, and transportation sectors. The industry uses flat-rolled steel and steel billets to manufacture our welded and seamless pipe and tube products. Today's hearing is timely because steel has returned to the forefront of national and international public policy. The CPTI supports the President's recent 232 actions to address our surging steel imports that endanger the U.S. national security by jeopardizing the viability of the nation's steel sector. We are optimistic that the 232 will make the necessary adjustments to imports to ensure a level playing field for the industry and its workers. The entire U.S. steel pipe and tube industry has been overwhelmed by surging imports. In fact, 2017 marked one of the highest years on record as pipe and tube imports surged by 82%, from 4.6 million tons to 8.4 million tons, as the U.S. continued to be the dumping ground for the global excess steel capacity. As others have stated, South Korea is China's largest export market for steel. South Korea is also the largest exporter of pipe and tube into the U.S., shipping between 2 and 3 million tons annually. I would like to emphasize, as this was mentioned earlier, South Korea has no domestic consumption for energy tubular products, yet they export the highest volumes to the U.S. This is also true for many other pipe and tube products. There is a direct connection between China's steel exports to Korea and Korea's pipe and tube exports to the United States, and it only reiterates why it is critically important that we receive comprehensive relief. We will remain vigilant in our work with the administration, Congress, and the caucus to ensure the 232 remedy will end the flood of Korean pipe and tube imports. Our industry has used the trade laws with measured success for over 3 decades. As the Secretary of Commerce stated, the steel industry cannot continue to be subjected to a whack-a-mole approach. Thank you for that, Mr. Brent. And we wholeheartedly agree. We are hopeful that the continued support of the Trump administration can arrive at a remedy that addresses the bad actors. As Congressman Visklosky stated, it is critically important that our Trade and Customs Department have the appropriate funding to enable us to enforce these trade laws. The U.S. pipe and tube sector wants to be part of this country's continued economic growth. We want to make producers for new pipelines, new infrastructure projects, new residential and commercial construction, the national defense, all projects that would stimulate the demand for other steel pipe and tube products. Frankly, if trade is not conducted fairly, our industry will not be able to compete for these projects. In closing, the CPTI also recognizes the chronic global steel overcapacity must be addressed, and we are encouraged to know that the administration continues to pursue enforceable reforms through international dialogues. We commend the caucus for their leadership and support of trade legislation that has provided the trade tools used to challenge unfair trade practices and end chronic customs fraud, circumvention, and evasion practices. For over 4 decades, Steel Caucus has kept the issues of importance to the industry and workers before Congress and the nation, and we thank each of you for your leadership, support for an industry that helped build this great nation. The CPTI certainly wants to be part of the next chapter in rebuilding this country and pledges to work with you and your staff to successfully implement these policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I would like, if I could, to introduce Mr. Todd Young. He will be testifying on behalf of David Burritt, CEO of U.S. Steel. Mr. Burritt is down with the flu today and could not be here. I understand another witness was supposed to be here, but fortunately, he is very, very busy trying to turn up Granite City Steel at this time. So we're very happy to have Todd here to talk to us today, and so now you're introduced. Thank you.
So are we.
Thank you, Chairman Bost. On behalf of United States Steel Corporation and our CEO, Dave Burritt, thank you for convening today's hearing. As a result of the bipartisan leadership of this caucus and President Trump's strong Section 232 action, the American steel industry is beginning to see a level playing field. For decades, foreign steel producers have targeted America's open market with a flood of imports, undermining America's steel strength, jeopardizing our national security, and leading to tens of thousands of lost jobs. National security is only as strong as American steel, and the American steel industry is strongest when we have the ability to manufacture steel from start to finish inside our borders. A weak or struggling American steel industry leaves our nation dependent on countries focused on their own economic interests and well-being, not ours. America has the capacity to melt and pour the steel it needs for national defense, for infrastructure, to produce and transport energy, and to supply domestic manufacturers of automobiles, machinery, appliances, and other consumer and industrial goods. United States Steel Corporation is a 100% American integrated steel producer, which means our products are mined, melted, and made here in the USA. Beginning in 2014, our company felt the force of the latest surge of unfair imports. Thousands of workers were laid off, a blast furnace shut down and demolished, 2 more blast furnaces idled for over 2 years now, and multiple finishing lines shuttered or operating at bare minimum levels. Through the skill and sheer will of our workforce, U.S. Steel fought through these unfair trade attacks and is investing in our people, processes, and products to revitalize and innovate for the future. As a result of President Trump's Section 232 action, U.S. Steel has announced the reopening of 1 blast furnace and the steelmaking facilities at Granite City Works in Chairman Bost's Congressional District in southern Illinois. For over 2 years, since December of 2015, these facilities have sat idle. Our employees and the surrounding community suffered as waves of unfairly traded steel flooded into the United States. U.S. Steel is recalling and hiring approximately 500 workers to restart and operate these facilities, and over the course of a full year, this operation can produce 1.5 million tons of raw steel. On March 11th, the Wall Street Journal highlighted the positive ripple effect that Granite City steelmaking jobs are having on the community and economy. From the shoe store to restaurants to the businesses that supply and service our operations, there is a, quote, new level of hope. President Trump's Section 232 action begins to level the playing field for the security and the manufacturing strength of the United States. No one can predict tomorrow's threats. The geopolitical climate will remain complex and uncertain. We need to have steelmaking here at home during a national security emergency, not be awaiting its delivery on a vessel crossing the open oceans. We need American-made steel to rebuild our infrastructure. We need American-made steel to harness and transport our abundant energy resources. We cannot truly achieve American energy independence if we're reliant on foreign steel products to develop our own resources. President Trump's Section 232 action recognizes that for too long, the status quo approaches to steel imports have been failing our country's security. America cannot afford to outsource an industry as vital to security as steel. At United States Steel Corporation, we're working to do our part, restarting steelmaking operations, calling back steel workers, and continuing to support our customers with the high-quality products they've come to expect from us for more than a century. On behalf of U.S. Steel CEO Dave Burritt, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning, and thank you to the entire caucus for your advocacy on behalf of American-made steel.
Thank you, Todd. Our final witness is Brigadier General John Adams. General Adams is president of Guardian 6 Consulting. General Adams retired from U.S. Army in 2007 after more than 30 years of service. Thank you for your service. He has testified and written extensively about the implications of unfair trade steel imports and how these harm our nation and economic security. General Adams, you may now deliver your testimony.
Thank you, co-chairs Boston, Crawford, Vice Chairman Visklosky, distinguished members of the Steel Caucus. As a 30-year veteran of the United States Army with a background in aviation, strategy, and intelligence, and as the lead author of the 2013 study of the U.S. Defense Industrial Base, Remaking American Security, my view of the steel industry is through the lens of our national security requirements. My experience and research in national security issues tell me that our domestic steel industry is vital to our nation's national security and that we must take urgent action to ensure that it retains the capacity to equip our military and sustain our critical homeland infrastructure. We can never mortgage this capacity, especially not to our strategic competitors. Indeed, the recently announced tariffs are only the first important steps to rebuild our steel capacity to ensure reliance in future conflicts. Reliance on foreign sources of steel, especially from strategic competitors, results in uncertain supply for critical national requirements, especially in a crisis. In 2004, on duty in Iraq, I witnessed our warriors applying jury-rigged armor plates, often sent by their families, to their vehicles to protect against IEDs. When DoD asked foreign suppliers to up-armor American vehicles, the foreign suppliers put our requirements in their months-long queue for orders. Only American steel companies subject to rated orders scheduled in weeks rather than months supplied the armor plate for our up-armored vehicles that protected our warriors from IEDs. I'd like to make three major points. First, our nation's security rests on a military equipped with the technology, weapon systems, and platforms needed to protect our nation, supplemented with logistical and critical infrastructure. Despite technological advances in materials, notably composites and ceramics, domestic production of steel, often manufactured according to sensitive defense and homeland security specifications, remains vital in the manufacture of our defense and critical infrastructure. Steel is used in everything from armor plate for armored vehicles to aircraft carriers' decks. And production for our critical infrastructure is just as vital to our strong nation as is our weaponry. For example, bridges, rail systems, the electrical grid, and energy infrastructure. A healthy domestic steel sector, from raw iron that is mined in places like the Marquette Iron Range in Michigan and the Iron Range in Minnesota, and scrap suppliers nationwide, to inputs sensitive to steelmaking demand, including coke produced from metallurgical coal in places like West Virginia and Kentucky, to raw steel production and finishing stages in many states, is critical to sustaining the quality and quantity of capabilities to preserve our national security. Second, while only a small percentage of domestic steel production is geared towards traditional defense purposes, U.S. steel manufacturers must remain commercially viable to innovate and produce the unique defense products that meet military specifications. It is a myth that steel will always be available for U.S. defense requirements. Domestic steelmakers' health depends on the health of their commercial sectors. Conversely, the overall health of domestic steelmakers is not contingent on defense production. In our market economy, this means that our steel industry must attract investment and remain profitable. We must also remember that our military advantage depends upon preserving not only our production capacity, but retaining the research and development, engineering, and human capital needed to develop and produce the next generation advanced steel and composites. To remain ahead of our strategic competitors, we must constantly improve the quality of our steel to remain the most advanced in the world. Third, if we can't make our most sensitive weapons and equipment in America, we simply can't defend our country. We cannot allow our strategic competitors access to our most sensitive military specifications, nor can we risk them providing components or materials for our advanced defense systems. For example, we make the steel for our submarine hulls in America according to sensitive military specifications, so our submarines can dive deeper than any other countries. We can't afford to outsource this military capability to another country, especially not to our strategic competitors. We can't risk them providing us or outmatching us or providing us substandard components for such important capabilities as the ability for our submarines to dive deeper than Chinese submarines. And as China expands its global presence, a situation in which China exercises global market control is all the more alarming. I was among numerous retired generals and flag officers who appealed last September to the administration to act on the Section 232 investigation by adjusting steel imports, and we applaud the resulting tariffs. However, we must realize that protecting our defense industrial base, and notably for this context, steel, requires continuous vigilance and action at all levels of government. Once we lose our core steelmaking capacity, it is gone, and our most dangerous strategic competitors will take advantage of our negligence. We must ensure that the U.S. steel industry remains strong and ready, a foundation of our national security. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. Let me tell you that we weren't going to start into questioning. I will take the first question, then turn it over to Chairman Crawford. Vice Chairman of Pete has asked to go last so that others can get to questioning, and then we'll recognize others as they came in. So I'll ask real quickly, Mr. Young, how important was Section 232's announcement to your decision to turn up the B furnace at Granite City?
The restart of the largest furnace at Granite City and our steelmaking operations there is a direct result of the President's Section 232 announcement. Our CEO made this very point when he appeared live on CNBC with Secretary Ross to make the announcement about Granite City. I mean, quite bluntly, 232 is the reason these 500 jobs are back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Newport, you raised concerns about Section 232 that does not accurately cover many products, considered that are in electric steel. Could you elaborate on that and be specific why it is that we need to be more focused on what is covered?
Sure. In regards to making a transformer, you think of those green boxes outside your home or up on, the transformers up on a pole. Inside of that is electrical steels. So what we have seen occur with even the threat of the 232 action that started about a year ago was that we are seeing the internal parts of those, the steel being bought from overseas, coming into other countries, and then they're simply importing those parts into the United States. And we've seen manufacturers of those components leave the United States. Manufacturing jobs have left the United States, gone to Mexico, Canada, or other states. So it's an issue that needs to be addressed because it is easy to do. It'll be a way to circumvent the rules that are out there to basically cheat our system, beat our system again, and bring those parts in and get the steel at a lower price and really make the 232 remedy not effective. And I think if you look at the electrical steel industry, we're talking about national security and other things. This started over a decade ago. And, we faced trade actions by China that blocked us and the former producer, ATI, out of the market. And they brought in, WTO ruled in our favor 5 years later. There's no penalty, basically a hand slap. In the meantime, they built enough capacity to serve the world. Okay. So that capacity, we've seen what has happened. We saw what others have done in the industry and what the implications have been roughly 10 years later. It's been a trade action that we've been fighting, and we need to address the downstream. Otherwise, people are just going to beat the remedy of 232 like they have with all our trade cases.
Okay, thank you. That's where we need to focus. So and I don't know who wants to answer, if a couple of you want to answer this. As some of you may know, I led the House efforts for trade remedies improvements back in 2015. Then we thought it alone would do the trick in terms of dealing with and having a faster reaction time through these trade remedies. How are anti-dumping and countervailing duty trade remedies performing for your companies today?
I'll comment on the electrical steel. They have not been, we have it on the nose products, which is for motors and electric vehicles, et cetera. But quite simply, we're still seeing imports are a major part of our market. They're still high. They went down a little bit. They came right back up. So as was mentioned, the whack-a-mole and what's happening, we're just seeing steel come from all different countries. And so the trade actions and trying to level the playing field and all of your actions have been helpful to help address it. But everyone's just figuring out how to beat our system. And, hopefully the actions that were taken by the president, that the other countries take to similar action, because the problem is the trade cases didn't fix the underlying problem, which is global overcapacity. And if all the countries address the underlying problem, then we will have success. Otherwise, we're just going to be continuing this battle.
If I can add to what Roger said, you may be surprised by this comment, but Our union's participated in the last, since 2012, in 85 trade cases at the ITC. We've won about 98% of them. But it's like playing whack-a-mole. And this is not a steel example, but it's a real example. We filed a 421 case against China on truck and bus tires. We succeeded in getting a 3-year declining remedy. At the end of the 3 years, China put 50.1 million tires into the U.S. market within 6 months. That's a very obvious one, but the point Roger raises happens all the time. Our remedies are short-lived. We don't win at the WTO, and the USTR, as well as the ITC, are always short-staffed. We tried to do a case on auto parts. We couldn't do a case on auto parts because the trade ITC didn't have a Mandarin translator. And that's all those are parts that are, as Roger pointed out, coming into America made by steel that would have been dumped in America. So instead of, could we have a remedy on a part of the steel industry, they convert it to an auto part and then they ship it here. And if I can add anything of any merit to this, that everybody on the Steel Caucus and others who aren't on the Steel Caucus should understand that unless there's major enforcement of the 232 decision, this will be a sieve, and it will be it'll be a sort of a moment in time where people got their 15 seconds of fame, and then we went back to the same problem. So we're counting on you.
Thank you. Yeah. Real quickly, because I know they're going to want to ask other questions. So.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, obviously, as we talked about earlier, the import numbers that have come in for 2017 were up again from over 4 million tons to 8 million tons, specifically driven by Korea, which is really driven by China. I mean, China is funneling steel into all these other countries, and as Mr. Gerard said, they're changing it into other products and getting around our trade laws. In fact, just to give you an example of how they do it, we just got some information from one of our customers that a shipper from China said, we'll take care of the trade laws for you. We'll ship this product over to Malaysia, change the country of origin, and we'll ship it in, and you won't have any trade law. It's continued, and that's where the whack-a-mole comes in. They're going to funnel every trade law we put in, they're going to funnel that product to another country to get around that.
I think it was vitally important to get those comments on the record, so we all know this is going on, but it is.
Costa Rica had a 7,000% increase in shipments of steel to America.
Amazing.
Costa Rica.
Yeah. I'll turn it over to Rick Crawford.
Thank you. I guess one of the regrets that I have is that I did not copyright the term whack-a-mole. But you're right. That's something that we know that it's an issue for us. I want to shift gears a little bit, exercise a little bit of privilege here, if you will indulge me. And one of the common themes that we've heard from each of you to some degree, and some even more so, is the national security, what I would say the vital to our national interests that steel presents. And I don't know, but there's probably just a handful of industries that could be categorized as vital to the national interests. Steel is certainly one of those. I would say energy, agriculture. All these things are inextricably linked as well. They're enmeshed. But we see this sort of coming to a head here in the steel industry, and why it's important that the president took the action that he did, and why it's important that we continue and stay the course. Because as the general referenced, the world is complicated. It's not getting any friendlier. And so many of the actions that we see taken economically to some degree have a military component, an ideology behind that's driving it. And at some point in time, as you illustrated in your testimony, General, we just simply can't rely on foreign sources to up-armor our Humvees, to provide the steel for our submarines. And so I was present in the meeting along with my two co-chairs recently at the White House when the president announced that they had come to some decision on their findings and recommendations on 232. And I was really struck by the number of individuals in that room who would obfuscate the national security interests by saying, well, that only represents about 2 to 3%, maybe 4% of the domestic market. I'm not talking about the domestic market. I'm talking about our ability to meet the demand from a vital national interest perspective. As Mr. Newport, as you've alluded to, there's one of you. And the potential for attacks on our electrical grid. Things of this nature, our inability to meet the demand from an infrastructure standpoint, transportation being one of those vital national interests. If we can't meet our own needs, we're at the mercy of other nations. And so, you know, I think you would all agree with that. I think the trouble that we're having is this idea that somehow it's politically incorrect to state the obvious and to stand up for ourselves and be okay with that. And so I'm a little off script here, and I'm sure my staff is probably, ready to duct tape their heads. But let me just say that I think it's time in this country, and I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, that we start to stand up for ourselves. How many people have flown in an aircraft recently? Probably everybody in this room. And one of the things they tell you in their safety briefing is if we lose cabin pressure, an oxygen mask will fall down in front of you. Place the oxygen mask around your face first before you help anybody else. There's a reason for that. You're no good to anybody. If you've lost oxygen yourself, take care of yourself so you can help somebody else. We are in a much better position globally if we can take care of ourselves and meet our own needs before we start worrying about adopting a politically correct attitude and approach to other nations around the world. And that's not to malign other nations around the world. It's not to say that we're better than them, but it is to say that we have a responsibility to ourselves, first and foremost, to put our own mask on so that we can start to help others around the world. And so I had some questions for you. I got on my soapbox instead, so I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to yield. But I just wanted to food for thought and let you know where I stand on that issue.
In response to your time, I would urge you to have your staff research the Bay Bridge from San Francisco to Oakland, made with Chinese steel, almost half a decade late and billions of dollars overrun. The Verrazano Bridge in New York, we were told we don't have the capacity to make it. I told the person from New York, then just make it the way you made it 100 years ago. It lasted that long. So the point that you raise is real. We're losing our capacity to make things that we need in this country.
One thing I'll leave you all with, and we're here as a caucus to render whatever help we can to the industry and to the workers who comprise that industry, as I said before. But I'm going to ask you all to help us, and that is, I think we've reached a point where maybe we need to coalesce around a number of industries that represent that vital national interest. Maybe we can work together collectively, collaboratively, to really get a better handle on how we affect national security. And I'm not talking about the defense industry per se, that's important, but I'm talking about the security of our country, the security of our family and our friends, our neighbors, our communities, and how we address that within the context of vital national interests. Yes, sir, General.
I would like to follow up on that briefly from the perspective of strategy, sir. I mean, you're absolutely correct that we must essentially put on a strategic view on what is good for our country and what is essential for our country, and that is just basic common sense. But let's talk about the steel industry for just a moment, because that's what of the most interest today. We have determined, because we know that our steel industry provides essential and irreplaceable materials for our national defense, that we must do something to adjust steel imports. And I think all of us in this room are comfortable with that. We can articulate that clearly. Do we seriously think that China doesn't see it from the other side? They see the same thing. Because strategy works, it's it's universal. They look at what we need for our national security and they say, let's take it down. And they've got a very efficient way to do that through state control. And they subsidize industries that they want to take over the global market and again, do it very effectively. We used to have a process in our State Department initiated by Andrew Marshall. Many of you may know who he is, a real visionary who retired, I think he was in his 90s, about 3 years ago. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, he came up with the concept of 20 crown jewels of the defense industry. And we are talking about the defense industry, but one could apply it more broadly, and I think we should, as you suggest. But we haven't updated that. There's such a fear of picking winners and losers and picking technologies that we think we want to develop. We're not doing it. Why? The Chinese certainly are. They have the reverse of that process called strategic emerging industries, and they certainly do focus on subsidizing their strategic emerging industries. So I'd make a comment, and I appreciate your direction, sir. We in this country need to determine what our own strategic industries are, and then foster them and protect them as necessary to ensure our national defense. Just like Andy Marshall did 25 years ago. He's retired now, but the concept's the same, and I think we ought to urge the Defense Department and, in fact, the whole of government to follow that process. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Let me just say, Mr. Chairman, you can cut down an oak tree in 5 minutes. It takes a long time to grow one back. And what I'm afraid is that if we're not careful, we're going to be cutting this oak tree down, and it won't be grown up and mature when we need it the most.
Thank you, Rick. And I'm going to start turning it over to others. We don't have a timer, but we do need to make sure that other members have a chance to speak. Representative Doyle, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief, just a brief comment. Many of us here on the Steel Caucus, and in the 23 years that I've been here, I've watched members of this panel testify in front of the ITC more times than we care to remember. And the basic fact that people who don't come from steel-producing areas need to understand is the remedies that are available to us aren't working. We're not getting relief. And that's why we need to turn to something like this. But with 232, the devil's in the details. And we need details. How long is this remedy in place? How is this exemption process really going to work? And I think people need to be cognizant of the fact that the Chinese simply play a game with us where they just ship this product to a country maybe that isn't one we're targeting, and it comes from that country. So we have to be smart about how this is implemented. I would also heed what Mr. Wisłowski said for all of us up here. We need to give proper funding to these agencies that are charged with protecting us because they are understaffed and underfunded. And I hope as we address budget issues that all members of the Steel Caucus in both parties will push hard to make sure we get the funding we need at ITC and these other agencies that are charged with protecting us. Leo said it right. We're not looking for an advantage here. We're looking for fairness. If we have fairness, our industry can compete with any steel industry anywhere in the world. And that's all we're asking for. So as people talk to us from other parts of the country that don't understand how this works, we need to educate our fellow colleagues in both parties that think we're being protectionist somehow to understand that this is a basic industry we dare not lose. And Mr. Chairman, I look forward to continuing to work with you and with you, Pete, as we move forward. We have Congressman-elect Connor Lamb here. We're breaking him in right. He's from Pittsburgh, so he will be a member of the Steel Caucus. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of you to protect this very vital industry that we know is so important to our national security and our economy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
I'll just make a comment. As I said to the president about the aluminum industry, is that we have a workforce ready and willing. That's the same with the steel industry. And when you're talking about 3,000 jobs that has just been created since the president's order, 450 of those is in the Boot Hill of Missouri, with the new aluminum smelter opening up, which is another industry, which I was happy to celebrate. I enjoy the growth in Blytheville. It's just across the border. Appreciate Nucor's investment in Sedalia in the state of Missouri. So these are real jobs that are affecting real Americans, and it's of national security interest that we make sure that we can compete with the world as long as it's a fair playing field. So I just appreciate sitting in on the panel and listening to you, sitting here and listening to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Newport, as you know, AK is about a half a mile from the dealership. So I've had a really deep relationship with a lot of those folks that work there. But one of the things I'm going to ask each of you as you come forward, and we're talking about the steel industry, there's also another very important aspect of this that sometimes people don't think about. And what I'm talking about now is revenue. And we're sitting in a situation right now with Social Security when we know the only source of revenue for Social Security are wage taxes. If sometime in your testimony you could actually relate the total economic footprint of your industries, the wage taxes you pay, the benefits you supply for the folks that work with you every day, because then sometimes we get all wrapped around the axle on employer-sponsored insurances and pension plans, and we forget the really reason we do that is to give people a secure future and not put a burden on future taxpayers. What you do is so incredibly important, and not just what you do, but all the ancillary items. I think, Todd, when you talked about things that are mined, melted, and made. That covers an awful lot of jobs. So we have a real difficult issue right now when we look at these things, and I hear so many people talking about, yeah, but you know what? What the president just did is going to cost like another penny for every can we produce. My God, are you kidding me? We're worried about that, and we're missing the bigger picture about where does the revenue come from. It comes from hardworking American taxpayers who contribute with every single paycheck, and the companies they work for, you pay real estate taxes, you put all this money into the system that protects us all. So I wanted to ask you, when you do make these comments and when you do appear, because I see the problem right now, is there's too many people that don't know what they don't know. And they start to point a finger at something and they say, well, no, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about something that goes much deeper than that. So I would just encourage you to please don't give up. And Leo, I know you come every year and we're all fired up. But I got to tell you, in the 8 years I've been here, this is the first time I've ever come to one of these caucus meetings where that somebody was actually doing something other than talking about what they could do. So I champion it. I think that's great. And I have some friends of mine that still don't understand what this is all about. It's about education. You better understand the implications of what we lost. And I think Rick talks so clearly about this. We cannot afford to lose any more. And I'm going to go to a couple hearings today on trade. One of the things, I'm in the automobile industry. When I got started in our family business, 1 out of 3 new cars sold in America in 1970 was a Chevrolet. 1 out of 3 new cars, not General Motors market share, but Chevrolet. They own 33% of the car market. I'm sorry, 1 out of 4 cars. Now, trucks, 1 out of 3 trucks was a Chevrolet. So we controlled 25% of the car market, 33% of the truck market. Today, General Motors is struggling to reach 14% of the total market. And I tell people all the time, listen, if you lose a sale today, you may never see these people again in your lifetime. And what we've lost market share, and people say, yeah, but you can go to the WTO. And I'll tell you what a waste of time and energy and money to find out you won the case, but you lost the market. We have been waiting far too long to step up to an unfair situation. I'm so sick and tired of hearing people say, I'm for fair trade, free trade as long as it's fair trade. Really? Well, open your mind, open your eyes and start to smell the coffee. I don't care about winning a WTO challenge when we've already lost the market. It doesn't do a damn bit of good. There's no way we're tearing down any of these buildings that were built with steel that shouldn't be there and saying, well, let's take that down and we'll build it now with American steel. That's crazy. So listen, thanks for being here. And you know what? Some people say to me sometimes, sometimes you get too passionate about this. Damn it, we better get passionate about it because we are losing an entire industry. We are going to lose an entire country. And at the end of the day, I don't want to say, well, I didn't want to hurt anybody else's feelings. I do want to hurt people's feelings. I want to wake them up, slap them alongside the head and say, you better wake up. You better wake up. We never can regain this again. So thank you all for being here, but do me a favor. When you talk to us, would you talk about your total economic impact on this country? Because when you talk about jobs, you're talking about things that make so much sense to me. In my community, you know this, Mr. Newport, we don't have the same steel company that we used to have. And whenever AK leaves, whenever we lose a steel company, we lose people that make our communities strong, that make our churches strong, that are coaching our Little League teams and handle our Girl Scouts and are in our churches, in our schools, and are a strong part of who we are as Americans. So I'm so glad you're here, and we're not giving up this fight. And I'll tell you what, it's about education. We got to get people educated. So thank you so much. I got to run to another meeting, and so do you. But thanks so much for being here. And just stay on it. Yes, sir.
Before you go, if I can make one point in that you're in the automobile industry. The steelworkers lease vehicles for our full-time staff. When I became the president, we had a 75% North American content, which meant United States and Canada qualified. We have Chevy Impalas, last round. Next round of replacement cars for our staff, Chevy Impala doesn't qualify at 62.5%.
Domestic content.
We're down now domestic content somewhere around 50%.
Right.
So, you know, you're on the right track about holding them accountable. So
yeah, well, listen, you and I talked about Chevy trucks. I love Chevy trucks, but I'd rather they built them in Detroit instead of Mexico. So the guys at General Motors get mad at me for saying that, but it's the truth. It's the truth. And we let that happen on our watch. It's deplorable. So listen, thank you all for being here. Please don't give up on us. But really, Leo, how many times have been these things when we walk out here and say, it was nice to have the meeting, but we didn't get anything done. The only thing we decided about is when's the next meeting.
I'm fed up of meetings.
Yeah, me too. It's time to act, right? It's time to run the play. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. GT, recognize.
Michael, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Much appreciate your leadership and all the folks that, all the hardworking folks that are working in our steel industry. General, I'm going to start with you. Thank you for your service as a Army dad. I got a staff sergeant still serving today. He just had a climate change of his own. He went from San Antonio, Texas to Watertown, New York. So you're going to have to get used to the snow up there. You know, General, do we have a capacity to measure our ability to be prepared to step up? You know, it was our steel industry that really stepped up and allowed us to be provide for the armor, the equipment, the things that we needed in World War I, World War II. Even those mills that were not at the time manufacturing those things specifically, many of them transitioned. You know, they flipped to meeting the national security needs of the time. Do we have any kind of measure or metric to say if we had and we have terrorism today, and we're going to have that, who knows, probably forever. It's permeated into many different countries' cells. But if we had a nation state, a large nation state that would rise up again, you know, move from an economic agenda to more one of war and conquest, what is your assessment of where we're at currently today with our steel industry to be able to not just react to that, but to win like we've done in the past when the world's been faced with major evil and threats?
Thank you for the question, sir, and you put your finger on probably the most important strategic point. What capacity must we have to defend our country successfully? And I think our steel industry now is gravely threatened, as we know, and so we're putting in force these tariffs which are designed to allow it to recover. I think we need to do two things strategically to get a handle on exactly that question: what capacity must we retain? First, we have to take a broader view of what is national security than traditional defense purposes. And we heard from we heard from the GOES manufacturer about the electrical grid. It's hard to imagine that would not be an important element of our national security.
Right.
It doesn't shoot, it doesn't fly, it doesn't swim, but it certainly provides for our national security. But that's an example of how we need to open up the aperture of what is important, what are the important elements of capacity that we need to have to provide for our national security. I don't think we have a good handle on that yet. The other thing I would mention is that we also need to include the research and development aspect of those important materials and components and weapon systems and equipment that we need. if we stop technology development, which of course is ridiculous because it's going to continue to develop, then maybe we would be okay. But if we don't invest in research and development and in human capital, retaining and training new workers, new engineers, new staff to produce and manufacture in the United States, we're all immediately going to be behind the power curve with our strategic competitors. So the bottom line is, I think we need to do a better job. I think we need to take a really hard look at that term capacity. What is that capacity we need to retain in order to defend our country? I don't think we have a good handle on it right now. I'm not privy to what's going on in the Department of Defense to answer that question. I know there are some good people working the problem right now. I know the question is that the President has asked the Department of Defense to take a hard look at the capacity that we need, and I applaud that. I hope that research is going well, but that is exactly the question we need to ask, and we need to find out what the answer is. Again, open the aperture to more than defense purposes, and to consider the research and development capacity as well as the current production capacity. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, General.
If I may build on that for just a moment, because this issue has come up, it has been referenced several times, and it's the issue of looking at the broader picture of our industry relative to national defense. And that has to do with the whole issue of infrastructure. It's more than just supplying the steel for the armored plate for the ships and the deck of the aircraft carriers and so forth. It's the power grid. It's having bridges that we can move manufactured goods across in a time of crisis effectively and safely. So as you have the debate over the infrastructure bill relative to the national defense, it needs to be considered from that perspective also. It's more than just an economic issue. Infrastructure, a strong infrastructure that supports a strong economy, is also essential for national defense. So there's a lot of talk about the infrastructure bill and how difficult it is to get it through. Please consider the impact on national security also that infrastructure has in general on national defense.
Absolutely.
Bridges.
Could I add one other part to that? I think we need to be really careful. It's a very good question, but we should keep in mind that steel making is capital intensive. It's fixed cost intensive. You can't put one of these up overnight. And so, you have to look, as John just said, look more broadly. But the other thing is, when you need it, you need it. Just like the General said, when we've been called upon, it goes right to the front of the schedule. Well, we have it available. If we're not commercially viable, I don't care if it's 1%, 5%, 10%, it's not going to be there. So I think you have to look broader as, okay, what kind of utilization do you need to be sustainable?
Okay, well, once again, thank you very much. I have additional questions, but I'll pass on those for the purpose of yielding to my colleagues. Except to say, I heard a number of comments about with the 232 that good start, first step, and so I just look forward to, as I think we all do, of working with you to see what those next steps are. So, thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Penninger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the spirit of my good friend, Mr. Kelly, who departed, I think we are all very exercised over the exploitation of China in our markets since, frankly, the most favored nation trading status and the devaluation, manipulation of their currency and subsidize how they subsidize their industry. But more particularly, I've been conscious of the reality of what China's done to acquire our technology, military-related companies. And to that end, Senator Cornyn and I have introduced a CFIUS reform that the Committee on Foreign Investments in the U.S. China, since 2015, has acquired 43 semiconductor companies, 20 of which have been in the United States, supply chain to our defense. They have, since 2010, their investments in the U.S. were $4 billion. 2016, it was $46 billion. So we have a great need to reform CFIUS to make sure that it's adequate to not enable the loopholes for joint ventures and minority positions to acquire these companies. Let me just say we're being greatly challenged by some industries who, in my Wall Street Journal op-ed last week have been complicit, have been involved. And we need your support. We need your engagement on this issue. It is a fight. And it's a fight for making sure that America controls its own destiny, that we maintain our superiority in technology. President Xi himself has said that his interest is to be superior in technology by 2025. So I appreciate the work. Mr. Ferriola knows that my full commitment to the steel industry and our interest to make sure that we do have free and fair trade. But as well, we, in a broader sense, need to recognize the vulnerability of our own markets and our own important intellectual property that's being transferred over to the Chinese. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for recognizing that, what I call the backdoor attack that's being made on our national defense. And you mentioned all the investment that China is making in the United States. Let's remember that United States companies, American companies, are still prohibited from owning these vital companies in China. So it's a very one-way street. They're very strategic in how they apply the investment laws in China.
And when they go there, they are forced to do joint ventures with the Chinese. And then
they lose their intellectual property.
Yes, sir.
So thank you for recognizing that. And as you know, Nucor has sent a letter supporting your position on this. Thank you for that.
If I can build on what John just said, I've been watching in the last few weeks members of Congress's comments and others who would like to be able to get cheap dump steel for their own needs, saying, well, we should just focus on China. And let me say this, China is the worst culprit, but they're not the only culprit. And China is a master at circumvention. I made the snarried remark about Costa Rica had 7,000% increase in shipments. How the hell could that happen? If they're shipping, it's stuff that used to be in China. So your point about China is well taken, but I think we got to make sure that we don't focus just on China. We got to focus on China plus all the other cheaters.
True. They're the ones who've employed the lobbyists up on the Hill that are working it real hard. Notwithstanding, we have the support from the President, Secretary Mnuchin, Secretary Mattis, Secretary Ross, and others, a vast array of people in our military and private sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hartzler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here and for all that you do and mean to our country. And Mr. Ferriola, I want to thank you for coming to my district. So I understand my colleague from Missouri earlier mentioned the new plant in Sedalia, but we are just very excited to have that rebar mill there and the 225 jobs you're going to bring. So thank you for doing that. And I guess my question is just kind of in general, how are the pro-growth policies that we have been working on here and advancing in Washington, D.C., how do they play in your decision to continue to build and grow in America? And you know, what are your thoughts on what more we can do to continue to make U.S. the best place to work and have manufacturing?
Well, let me first say that we're really happy to be going to Sedalia. Earlier, we talked about the economic impact on our country that the 232 will have, and it's clearly very important to the country. But if you want to really see the impact, you should have been with me when we announced the mill going into Sedalia. Yeah. I'm telling you what, there was the State Fair House was just packed with people. The excitement that took place that day and the passion that Americans had and their willingness to say, hey, bring that mill here, we will work hard, we will get it built, we will make it successful. The number of times I heard that in the couple of hours that I was there was just amazing. And if you want to see a great American town, I'm going to say small town, okay?
Absolutely.
It is America at its finest. It is the grassroots of America.
It is.
You drive into the town, you got the main street, right? There's the bridal shop on one side, the little cafe on the other side. You go in and everyone says, what are you doing here? You're new. Okay, what brings you to town? Okay, in a very friendly way.
Yeah.
And the excitement that took place that day, that town and those people in that town, that is what made America great. That is what built this country. And if we ever stop recognizing the need to invest in our industries, in those towns, in those communities, and you said 225 jobs, that's direct jobs, okay? I guarantee you that there'll be 5, 6, 7 times that amount, as hotels are already being planned. That small cafe I went into, they got plans for expansion already I heard about, okay? I mean, that's what built America. So I kind of went, off track there a little bit, but
Preach it, brother. You're just sounding good to me.
I'm telling you what, it makes you feel so good, and you can see firsthand what an industry, a basic industry like the steel industry, can do for the local communities, the states, and this country, okay, through the investment. And what encouraged us to do that, and what do we need to continue to see in order to do more of that? It's to have a sustainable industry. And to have a sustainable industry, we need to have a longer term commitment by our government to give us that level playing field to compete on. We don't need protection. You've heard that several times today. All we need is the level playing field. And we need to know that we'll have that level playing field for several years to come in order to make the major investments that we need. It's not, it costs us quite a bit of money to invest in Sedalia and the other plant in Florida. And we're willing to do that as long as you know that you're going to have a level playing field for several years, so you have a sustainable industry to earn the return on that invested capital. You got to go visit Sedalia if you happen to be in Missouri.
Yes. This
Great
is
town. Truly loved being there.
I look forward to seeing you come back, and we'll go to the cafe for lunch.
Hey, can I just add one more thing very quickly? I apologize, but I know I'm kind of beating this to death. So right after I was down there, we had the announcement. About a week and a half, 2 weeks later, I get this cardboard box, okay, about this big, and it's from Sedalia. And in there was about 160 small cards that were written, thank you cards, in crayons from the Boys and Girls Club, okay? And one little guy, they had their name and their age, and one little guy, 6-year-old little boy, drew what he thinks the steel mill should look like, just in case we needed a little help with the design, okay? It was just, we cut our engineering costs, But, I mean, I'm telling you, it was truly amazing to see the reaction of the town. That's what made this country great. Please keep doing what you're doing so that we can rebuild the country the way that we built it once.
Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Kepter.
Well, thank you so very much, and I want to thank my colleagues, Congressman Visklosky and Thompson, for being such vigilant leaders for us here in the Steel Caucus. As I listened to you and read your testimony, which I did last night, I kept thinking about the first year that I came to Congress, and 1983, and joining the Steel Caucus with then a great Ohioan named Ralph Regula. He sat on the other side of the aisle and fought for this industry and for the companies in Ohio. And having experienced what has occurred and over those 3 decades, and the fight that we are still in to try to get footing for fair trade in your industry, I just want to thank you for being vigilant, and thank you for being survivors. Mr. Gerard, with all of the workers that you have had to counsel and comfort over the years, you are a very strong man. Thank you very, very much for being here this morning. I represent all of northern Ohio, from Cleveland all the way west to Toledo. And we have probably half the panelists this morning have a presence in the district that I represent, or I represent workers that work in your companies. What I find even till today in this Congress, however, and among many presidents, is zero understanding of the steel industry. And I've asked myself the question over the years, how is it that the tech industry gets so much publicity? And everybody knows, sort of the Bay Area, and there's stories every day, and there's this architecture to this, glamorous industry that has all these faults that are never reported, although some of them are coming out now. But it has an image. And agriculture has an image. Sometimes it's a false image of what really goes on in the countryside, but it has an image. The steel industry, for some reason, has to fight for its life every time an issue comes up. And I just sort of posit the question to you. I've had colleagues of mine say to me here, very genuine colleagues, Marcy, you know what? We got to come out to your area. We don't know what you're talking about. And I'm going to show them. But it's amazing to me, how diverse our country is. And I think part of our problem in the steel industry with trying to get fair trade over the years is a complete lack of any familiarity at all with it, or what it does, as hard as you try. And you're not in the publicity business, you're in the production business. So I understand that. But it's a real problem. And it continues to be a problem. Once these announcements were made by the president, look how you got battered in the press. The other side came out, we're in trade wars, we're going to, everything's going to shut down. There was no measured, the reporting wasn't measured. It's like, so I wanted you to comment about that. A lot of times you probably feel really alone out there and mistreated. You are?
I'm bouncing in my chair.
Okay.
I wherever I can, I make the comment that I resent the disparaging remark that is made about the industrial heartland, calling us the Rust Belt. It's the industrial heartland. And the fact of the matter, if you drive by a steel mill and you see those rounds of steel out in the yard, they all look the same, but they're not. They're all scientifically designed by whatever chemicals, compounds they needed to make that roll of steel. And it's usually within 1/10,000th of an inch of deviance. Goes in at one end and comes out at the other end, virtually perfect. It's scientifically designed. And I think we need to talk to the members of Congress, and we need to talk to others, including our own members in our own community, that get sucked into calling this the Rust Belt. As soon as you brand it the Rust Belt, people think it's a dying industry. And in fact, it's been helped to die by lousy trade policy. Trade policy, I can go back. I've got a letter in my office that I keep that Bill Clinton sent to the Secretary of Commerce as he was heading out the door in January of his last year, saying that the steel industry has been under unwarranted attack for more than 30 years. I urge the Congress of I'm so pissed off. The Secretary of Commerce to take it and deal with it. That was Bill Clinton. He didn't do any goddamn thing while he was there, but he was telling it to shake the door on his way out. So your point about us needing to redefine ourselves, this is not a bull hunk industry. This is an industry that's scientifically designed. If you go into, any of you have been in a pulpit, we call it the pulpit, up where the operators stand. You go into that pulpit and he's managing sometimes 4 or 5 screens. He needs more training than a 747 pilot before you can let him run by himself. So it's more than sparks and flash and fire. It's scientifically designed within 1/10,000th of an inch of deviance, and we ought to make sure that we talk about it. We can make steel lower than man hours per ton than anywhere else in the world. And by the way, we've met the Kyoto Protocol on emissions 10 years ago, long time ago, and still the Chinese can't do it. So am I pissed off? You're damn right I'm pissed off.
And I share your sentiment, because I often think the Wall Street Journal pre-232, the Times, there was an article on steel in the Wall Street Journal, was like once or twice a year. What I think those that disparage us don't necessarily remember history. When we put SDI together in 1993, there were about 55 steel companies, principal steel companies. Today, there are only 15 principal steel companies. And we too frequently forget the dead. If you think of J&L, LTV, Bethlehem, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, I mean, there's an array of just destitute, bankrupt entities out there.
Western Steel and Wire.
The other piece
the list goes on.
The piece that doesn't come out, Mr. Millett, is I've been inside closed markets. I bet every one of you have been also. American people don't even know that. These papers don't report it, what the competition looks like and what they're doing. So part of it is that these things are hidden behind iron curtains. They're hidden behind systems, and that doesn't come out. Most members of Congress, frankly, don't realize it.
There had to be a fight to get some legislation passed called leveling the playing field. The leveling the playing field means it ain't level yet. What we need the Congress to do is to say we're going to level the playing field. If we have a level playing field, we can beat anybody. But we can't beat cheaters. We can't beat people that will circumvent. We can't beat people that will transform, and this has to be the Steel Caucus. And there's many of the Steel Caucus that don't get to make it every meeting because they got lots of other things, but everybody that's in the Steel Caucus needs to be our guardian, needs to make sure that the administration is going to enforce what it passes, and make sure that it holds those countries accountable, the ones that cheat. And if you don't, we'll come back next year and the year after that, and maybe after that there'll only be 3 or 4 people show up.
Mr. Ferriola, were you?
Yes, because your basic question was, what is it about our industry that people do not understand? That they don't understand, to the points that were made. I mean, this is not. It's a very dynamic industry. It's a very technologically advanced industry. It's a very environmentally friendly industry. So why don't people understand that? Why don't they see it for what it is? And maybe we don't do enough on the public relations front, and maybe we don't do enough beating our chest about the industry. Sometimes it's really hard to talk about and be proactive on what's good about our industry when we continuously are fighting for our lives, okay? Not because of what we do, but because of what others are doing to us. So it's hard to talk about the good things that are going on in our industry when we're so focused on survival because of the cheating that is taking place. So I would advocate that we maybe need to do a better job of talking about our industry from a very positive perspective, and invite some of these, more of these reporters from the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times and the more liberal papers who think that the only way to make money is by moving money around. You don't create wealth by transferring wealth. You create wealth by making something out of nothing, okay?
Yes.
Or taking something out of nothing and making it better. It's the old law of engineering. There's only 3 ways to create wealth, right? You take something out of the ground, you take something out of the sea, or you make improvements to something you've taken out of the ground or out of the sea. That's what the steel industry does, and we need to remind people of that fact.
The chairman of this committee, of the Appropriations Committee, when I first got to Congress, was Jamie Whitten of Mississippi. And I remember him, he was an older gentleman then, but he would pound on the table and say, this country better never forget the difference between money and wealth. Money and wealth. And so he obviously represented a big agricultural district. But that is what you said, drawing it out of the ground or producing it, creating value, creating wealth. And by the way, many of the financiers of outsourcing are only into money. They're not into wealth production for this country. So I thank you for bringing up that point. I'll also just share with my colleagues, I had a bizarre experience a couple years ago of being in Lorain, Ohio, standing in front of U.S. Steel with the workers who were going to be pink slipped at that time. And my later appointment, about 3 hours from the time we were standing there with the workers, was going to the port of Cleveland and welcoming in the first ship, which was loaded with foreign steel. I thought, I wish I had cameras. I wish I didn't know that was going to happen. And those workers continue to be pink slipped and are very concerned about this decision in hopes that it will be managed in a way that will allow some of them to go back to work. And it is really, they have been battered by a government that acted too slowly. And I simply can't understand why the newspapers don't report that China manufactures enough steel to serve the entire world, 2,300 million metric tons, right, per year, and the world only uses half that much. Why isn't that in the first paragraph of every story that appears in the newspaper? And that, we're drowning in it globally. And, who's going to survive? And how do we survive in this kind of market? So I just think on the public relations front, maybe it's impossible, but I would just urge all of your communications directors for your various companies and organizations to get together. And I remember when TV first came in, I'll end with this, there was that one ad, it was for U.S. Steel. They had that big hand, and it was like emblazoning U.S. Steel. And I was a kid, I thought, wow, America's strong, and I still remember that image all these years, and I forget a lot. But I just think branding is really important in the world we live in now, and the American people need to understand how important you really are to this country. Thank you for coming today.
Congressman Boss might have seen something similar to yours. A few years ago, there was about 1.5 miles of railway cars loaded with foreign steel from India, right parked down the street from our Granite City facilities, and our Granite City workers were laid off, and that mile and a half of railway cars with Indian pipe on it was sitting right there. So
Exactly. Exactly. Vice Chairman, you're recognized. Last question.
I would simply follow up by suggesting that's what, about 1.9 hours per ton of steel. Some of you probably do it with less. I believe you also use about 31% less energy per ton of steel than you did in 1990. Carbon emissions are down. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's very high of the products you make today that were not made a generation ago. People see that roll of steel and assume it's the same roll that was there a generation ago, and it is fundamentally different because of the observations you've made. I would just have one request and one question. The request would be if all of you can get back to us with a list. I looked at, if you would, the negative side of the 232 as to keeping our eyes open and worried about possible exemptions. Mr. Newport had a very specific request about modifications that should be made. A number of you have touched upon them, and would suggest by the end of this month so that we can be prepared if there are items that can improve what has been proposed by the administration. I think all of us would appreciate having that so we can wade in a timely fashion. I am particularly concerned not only about the grain-oriented electrical steel that I did not know existed until our last Steel Caucus hearing, but also circumvention that many of you touched upon. I find it interesting that South Korea continues to suggest to the administration that we're allies and we're friends, but I look at a list of 45 countries before me who have countervailing duty and anti-dumping orders today. Costa Rica is not on there, but South Korea is number 3. Next time you have those conversations with the administration, I would suggest you remind them we also have tens of thousands of Americans in that country ready to give their lives to defend it. And the least they could do is abide by international trading standards. The question I have, and I thanked the Secretary of Commerce the last time we had a meeting, and I thanked him because it was, by my recollection, the first time I've ever talked to a Secretary of Commerce who did not mention the words dialogue and China in the same sentence. And many of you have addressed, and I do think it is the issue that still has to be resolved, is overcapacity. Mr. Millett mentioned some of the mills that existed. We all have lists ourselves. And I can remember in the late 70s, early 80s, and the 90s, there were some companies who aren't here today who were so desperate they undercut your price because they needed cash, and everybody suffered because of that. Everybody's suffering because of that oversupply, and I wish I had the answer. Is your sense there's some serious movement, and I assume part of the 232 is to pressure people to finally actively and concretely address the issue of oversupply? And do you have that sense? Do you have any recommendations? Because until that disappears, the pressure is going to continue here from my perspective.
I think we have to be, that's a very good point. And I think we have to be very careful about what we hear and what we read and what we purported to see taking place in China. I hear and read many articles about 30 million tons are being taken offline. And in reality, they talk about they reduced this 30 million tons of capacity, but what they're building is 25 million tons of production. And we have to be very careful about those two terms. There's a difference between capacity and production. They might be taking capacity off, and those mills that they're taking capacity out of are mills that are obsolete and really can't produce the types of steel that are needed today in today's 2018 marketplace. So they're shutting down capacity of mills that truly cannot meet the marketplace needs, and they're opening up new mills, and they talk in terms of production on those mills. So we reduced 5 million tons of capacity because we shut down this 30 million ton capacity plant. We started up this 25 million ton capacity plant. The reality is the 30 million capacity plant could never produce 30 million tons. It had capacity but not production, whereas this 25 million ton facility, because of the improvements in the technology, it can produce 25 million tons. So we're actually losing ground because that 30 million ton capacity plant was only producing about 15 million tons. So we got to really focus on capacity reduction and production reduction. Okay.
I think John brings up an excellent point about production. In America, when we don't have a market, we throttle back. Employees lose jobs, lose hours, lose pay. They just dump in sovereign support to keep their mills running and dump their problems onto us.
And I'd comment, I think it's very important that the underlying problem gets addressed. I think that, the action's been taken is going to force the problem to other countries, and hopefully not the, trade actions going on, but as I said earlier, is you address the underlying problem. And I think this is forcing some of it because we've taken a bold move here to address it, and we got to fix it, otherwise the Band-Aid will be ripped off, and we'll be having this discussion as we have for several years here and have for a decade.
Good point.
We got to address the underlying problem, and I think getting the other economies, and as we work with other countries, that if we do that the right way, I think it will force the problem back to where it is and help bring manufacturing back here to America.
2 points. The one that Mark just made, we had a active case we did on oil country tubular goods at the International Trade Commission at the ITC. Quote, it succeeded. It's a quote, it succeeded. There was a remedy applied to oil country tubular goods from South Korea. Substantial remedy, about 26% if my memory is right, John. Guess what South Korea did? They increased their exports. They found a way for their government to eat the 26%. Guess what? Our oil country tubular mills are down.
First off, I want to say thank you for everyone for being here. A couple things just to touch on. Let me tell you just a real quick story. About 2 weeks ago, one of the people who work in my O'Fallon office, who actually lives in Collinsville, which is just adjacent and down up the hill from Granite City. She had to go into Granite City. She called me while driving through Granite City. This is a week ago Thursday. And she called and said, I want you to know. Now remember all the people who have grown up around the area. I want you to know that Granite City smells like Granite City again. And that's a good thing. And so we were headed in the right direction. Obviously, from this meeting, we know we cannot stop here. We need to keep driving forward and understand this is just a beginning of heading in the right direction. I will ask the panel, if you would, and members that are still here, the house photographer has asked for a picture of all of us down here in front, if we can do that. And once again, thank you, and this hearing is concluded.